Well, thank you very much. Very much appreciate the opportunity to present the political statement from the Trinational Encounter on behalf of the students that were present. My name's Peyton Veitch. I'm the incoming National Treasurer with the Canadian Federation of Students. We're Canada's largest and oldest students organization, representing 600,000 students from coast to coast. And I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to travel to Mexico City and participate in the Trinational Student Encounter at the UNAM, National Autonomous University of Mexico campus, and exchange many different experiences, stories, and anecdotes about the collective struggle for defending public education across North America. I'm going to briefly run through the 6 elements of the statement that was drafted as a product of the discussions that we had during the encounter, where we delved into a variety of topics ranging from the impact of free trade agreements on our public education systems, new technologies and online learning, retrenchments in public funding, the assaults on the democratic governance of our post-secondary institutions, and many others. And this statement is a product of those deliberations. So firstly, out of the first Trinational Encounter, students are demanding free post-secondary education, free education from primary, secondary, and post-secondary levels in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. In Mexico, although higher education, public higher education, including at the National Autonomous University, is free at the point of access, we see the federal government in Mexico ignoring its responsibilities by implementing concepts such as self-management in basic education, and of course we've heard about some of the attempts the Mexican government is making to attack the security of teaching personnel in that country and impose a more quote-unquote flexible labor model, and also by the application of policies including terminal efficiency in higher education. In the Canadian context, like in the American context, we've seen since the signing of free trade agreements like the NAFTA, the skyrocketing of tuition fees. In Canada, we see now that this has led to 60% of students in post-secondary institutions coming from the highest 2 income quintiles, which means that rising tuition fees are locking out students from working class backgrounds from obtaining a post-secondary education. And we've seen a dramatic erosion of public funding in Canada as well, from a high of over 80% prior to the cuts of the early 1990s to just over 50%, lower in some provinces today. Added to this is the problem of institutional marginalization. This is something, again, that's not unique to Canada, but one of the things that I brought up as a Canadian participant is that we have a situation where only 4% of Indigenous peoples on reserves have a post-secondary degree, a university degree, compared to 23% of the Canadian population as a whole that have a university degree, and this imbalance has to be addressed. For American students, the picture is very similar. We have a situation where investment in prisons is surpassing investment in public education. We have some of the most marginalized constituencies in the United States excluded from institutions of higher learning, particularly, but not limited to, African Americans and Latinos. And these are also groups that are hit hardest by policies of criminalization in the United States. So once again, the demand for free access to university education, to college education, is one that's been articulated by the Trinational Encounter. Secondly, we've identified that free trade agreements, including NAFTA, but also the Trans-Pacific Partnership, need to be vigorously attacked. We can't have a situation where these trade agreements are creating a race to the bottom in the sector of public education in our countries, and it's incumbent upon students and educators across North America to resist instruments like the TPP that are already raising problems with public education and with our universities, and the signing of deals like the TPP will put our post-secondary institutions under even greater pressure. Thirdly, we need to address the fact that public universities in Canada have to be financed collectively by society, and the onus should not be placed on students to finance their education through private debt or loans through federal or provincial governments. We've seen in Canada the rise of accumulated student debt. Federal student debt reach $18 billion. We see an average federal student debt of $28,000. We heard from our American friend yesterday that the figure in the United States is $1 trillion in student loans outstanding. And what this is doing is it's really shifting the responsibility for the funding of education off of society as a whole to students as individuals. And this, of course, ties in to the problem that we're seeing of education being seen as a commodity or a consumer product. And of course, this is leading to communities that are more debt-averse, communities of color in particular, immigrant communities from pursuing a post-secondary education. Fourthly, we identified that the criminalization of youth in North America, particularly in the United States, but across the continent, must cease. Already spoke a little bit about this, but it's really something that we need to address, where young people are being, moving from secondary institutions to prison instead of moving from secondary institutions to post-secondary education. Fifthly, we need to demand greater resources for educational institutions in the public sector and have to reject this argument by government that there is no money in the pot for public education. We see that governments are prioritizing certain initiatives, including prison construction, including military spending, and other expenditures that don't enhance public good and public well-being, and we need to redirect that to public education. Finally, we need to acknowledge that education, the fundamental purpose of education, is to equip individuals to think critically about the society that they live in and to challenge systems of oppression and to challenge structures that disadvantage so many, rather than a system of education which, forces people to be cogs in a machine where they don't have agency and where they don't have power over their lives. So in Mexico, this is exemplified by things like dismantling alternative pedagogical projects. For instance, the College of Science and Humanities. We had one student participate from the law faculty at UNAM who spoke about the attacks on public interest law programs at the law faculty there. So it's critically important that we're not only defending access to education, but we're also defending a variant of public education that is empowering, that enhances people's agency as opposed to taking away from that. Finally, we have a special statement that's appended to our declaration, expressing solidarity with the Universidad Veracruzana as a result of the violence that's being perpetrated against the university community from the state government. I believe we've heard a little bit about this already. So we stand in solidarity with our student comrades at the University of Veracruz and support them in their demands. We also are calling on the Mexican authorities to cease their intimidation and harassment of students at the law faculty of UNAM, where we've seen political interference and political pressure on law students to support activities of the ruling party in Mexico, the PRI. We're also recognizing that, as we've done so throughout this conference, that we all have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with the families and with those who are agitating for the return of the disappeared Ayotzinapa students. And we're also, of course, fighting for a new model of education that is really about transformation and is about involving all of the different groups, students and educators, in its development. So that's really the declaration in a nutshell. It doesn't fully capture the rich discussions that we had during the trinational encounter. I'm hoping for many more successful trinational encounters in the future, and I'm hoping that in the coming days here at this conference, we can continue to deepen student-faculty solidarity, because it is critically important in the fight against neoliberalism. Thank you.